Hey, what's up? Well, I'm already making another video, and because I make no guarantees that the power will stay on, I'm gonna keep a flashlight on hand so that if I have to cut this off and or put a flashlight illuminating my face to finish out the video, I'll just have to do that because we are having some really bad weather as always, which is why, you really have to prepare for bad weather around here. I love having those little path lights outside, but unfortunately I don't trust them to withstand the weather. And I feel like the weather has destroyed or damaged a lot of our things because it just rains so much. But I guess that's better than having droughts all the time, because the driest weather around here is, it's still like a monsoon in some places. So anyway, enough about the weather. What I want to talk about in this video, more about dolls. I don't know where to begin, but, oh, you remember how I had, around Christmas time, I had gotten this dress from Temu, and I put it on a kidcore doll. It was intended for a Chelsea doll, but it ended up fitting my kidcore doll, so it was like a cross between Christmas and Valentine's. So it was perfect in December, January, and February, and really the whole rest of the year, to put on that doll and have her out, okay? And another doll I'd like to talk about in this video is this this baby called Tiny Tumbles, and obviously they had no boy versions in this series. I think they should have. They should always have some sort of a boy, even if it's just a unisex looking baby. But I guess it would have just looked like a generic baby, considering that this is one of few dolls with plastic pigtails and sleep eyes, or eyes that are sleeping. And what's special about this doll? Well, I think this was pre-color reveal. They've always had surprise dolls, that's always been a thing. But it was like, I don't think you knew what you were getting. It was like a blind bag type thing, but they had slight variations. You had your redhead, your brunette, your ethnic looking girl, and various blondes. And some of them had eyes that were open, some of them had eyes that were closed, like this one. And she's kind of like an elf. She has hands like an elf maid of sort. But one thing that is special about her, I'm just listening to the rain. One thing that is special about her, she was manufactured in 1996. And while that does make me happy to have a doll, and I don't want the whole series, I just want one. It does make me happy to have a doll from 1996. It is also a reminder of the fact that that was a terrible time in my life. Not only because I was turning 13, but because I didn't get a single solitary doll in grades 5, 6, or 7 when I was, 11 through 13. And then the only reason I got one at age 14 is because I was into Rugrats, watching them with my little sister, and I got the Angelica Pickles doll that was originally intended for her, and she got another one. So it wasn't even supposed to be mine. Kind of an afterthought, because they didn't have a fill, so she got a new Angelica and a fill, and I got her old Angelica. So anyway, this, is just a doll from 1996 without me having actually gotten it at that time. But I just often wonder how much more pleasant my life could be had I been more into dolls and less obsessed with the common freaking cold. I mean, I know it was inevitable that I would find some way to obsess on colds, considering what my name actually is. But it just would have been so much better to have more dolls in my life and be less obsessed with colds. So, that's a doll from 96. The other thing I wanted to talk about, oh, and this other doll, I think her name is actually Cindy. She was in this beautiful flight attendant dress. See, that's what I say. Timu has beautiful outfits, but not a whole lot of dolls. So if you have dolls and they're naked, it's kind of nice to buy from Timu and put them in the clothing. But that hat doesn't want to stay on. So that doll, I think her name was Cindy. And she's like a knockoff Skipper clone. And it's pretty sad when the clones go for just as much as the actual real deal dolls. And I have a few of these clones that I made into boys. But what's special is they have side glancing eyes. And that's what I like about them. And, I mean, my whole life, my whole life is just ruled by OCD. And, the letters OCD are found within the word cold. So that's a thought. So anyway, my dad doesn't really understand this. But a lot of my motivations behind buying these dolls or needing these dolls are very OCD oriented. Like everything is OCD. I mean, yes, I like them, but I have certain obsessions with certain aspects of them that he wouldn't understand. You know what I'm saying? Like converting them into boys. That pertains to my OCD about, wanting them to more accurately reflect the real world, wherein you have about as many males as females. And you have people of all ages, whether or not they're attractive at that age. You know what I'm saying? I mean, everyone has to go through that age at some point. And so the other doll that I wanted to show was, but the other thing that he doesn't fully understand is that these are very special to me because he's almost 10 inches. See, I've always wanted a vintage Ken. But what's even better than having a vintage Ken is having a vintage knockoff Ken clone that's a little boy instead of a fully grown man. And so I have a few of these that I made into boys. But then this one's even better. I think, oh my gosh, I could have bought a top of the line Ken, modern Ken, for a lot less than what I paid for this little guy. I think he was about $30. It was ridiculous because he's so rare. I think his name might be David. But he's a hollow Ken, and I made the clothing. He was nude, and I made his eyes green, and I think I may have painted his lips and eyebrows because they were coming off, and his hair flocking was coming off. And so that's Cindy and David. They almost look like they were made to go together. And I made the boots and everything. But what's special about him is that he is a cheap doll who is shorter. He's probably on a smaller scale, but he's shorter than most Kens and Barbies. He would be 4, 10, or 11. So he'd be like the height of a 6th grader or something. But he's in puberty, obviously. So, and that's very special. But what my dad doesn't understand is that, I have a very OCD way of looking at these dolls. And so I don't just want to have them because they're nice dolls. I have very specific motivations, and my motivation behind them, now of course those were from before I existed, but what has always bothered me is that, cheap hollow Barbies are just a dime a dozen. You can get them for $1 at any dollar store. Well, I have very few cheap hollow-bodied Ken dolls. Maybe a couple, Kens that meet that description, very lightweight, because they just didn't, as I've stated before, male dolls are hard enough to come by in the top of the line. And there's usually only one basic version. And to create variety, they might vary it up from one year to another. So, one year, like for example, the Kevin boyfriend of Skipper. Well, he was the only guy that size at that time. I think. Yeah, the only, Barbie line guy. Um, so, he basically, what they did was they would vary it up a little bit. The doll would have the same name and identity, basically. But one year he might be more brunette, the next year he might be more blonde looking. One year he might have bluish eyes, another year he might have green eyes, and so on. They were just painting him slightly differently from one year to another, kind of like tweaking cars that stay the same for several years. He was still Kevin, but he just looked slightly different. Ken could be a brunette or a blonde, but he normally had blue eyes. And so, yeah, there wasn't much variation on boys. And they didn't have a lot of knockoffs, because as I've stated before, knockoffs are, to compete with an existing market at a lower price. And when there's no real market for male dolls to begin with, why would the cheaper companies have to make them? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if people really desperately wanted a male doll, they probably had enough money to buy the one top of the line guy, like Ken or Kevin or Todd or Ricky or whatever the token boy's name was, Tommy, and then later Ryan of the Happy Family. And now I think the Chelsea boy is named Darren. So, most people, if they wanted a male doll, they could either buy a top of the line male doll, or, if the girls were young looking and kind of androgynous, you could cut the hair of a girl doll like I've done so many times. So anyway, what was special about that guy named David, the fact that he's short, is because, you just don't have, another thing is you didn't have a lot of hollow dolls in, what I call the 3-foot range, which is when they're like 6 or 7 inches tall. They would be 3 feet something as a person, or the 4-foot range, which is 8 or 9 inches tall. Just didn't have a lot of dolls in general in that height, but you certainly didn't have knockoffs of them. You know what I'm saying? Because knockoffs are like, you're just your basic product at a cheaper price. And so, unfortunately, though, because they are so rare and because they are so old, they end up costing more than some top of the line Ken dolls from the modern era. You know what I'm saying? You could go to Walmart and buy a Mattel Ken doll for a lot less, let's say $5 to $7. Maybe $5 a few years back, more like $7 today. You could buy a Ken doll and a pair of board shorts on clearance. They would be a lot cheaper, than this hollow doll, because he is so old and it is such a miracle. And by the way, he's wearing girls' panties, only they're made into a shirt, just kind of a makeshift outfit. But it's just special to me because, I made those boots as well. And she's slightly shorter than a Barbie doll. But yeah, I just like variety. And I've gotten so desperate for it that I have, quote, destroyed dolls and made my own, one-of-a-kind versions. And sometimes I'm not real happy with them. And I don't keep them forever, and that's sad. But other times, I just keep them as long as I can. So, yep. I've gone on way too long about these dolls, and I'll go ahead and post this video.